Again, Chinook salmon, like the really big streams, Chinook salmon are a large fish. And you can see right here that somebody's holding it up, probably 20 or 30 pounds. And the Harrison River up by Agassiz is where these fish are very, very predominant in the lower Fraser River. Chum salmon, again, we talked about these gnarly looking animals, sometimes called dog salmon, and they like from Hope to Mission in the main stem gravel reach of the Fraser River. So when you're driving to Hope with your family, going up maybe to Kamloops or to Prince George, and you're going along the highway up into the mountains, and you look down, you see the great big Fraser River. Well, that's a favorite habitat right there between Mission and Hope. That's where those guys like to live. We talked about pink salmon. Pink salmon also like to live there as well, and they like to live in the fast water, and chum salmon like to live in the slow water. So these fish have different kinds of habitats that they like to live in. And then for the lower mainland, again, the lower Fraser River, the Harrison Lake, as an example, is a really important sockeye salmon habitat. And you might be able to go in October with your family to the Weaver Spawning Channel up near Agassiz and see all of these fish, and it is a very cool thing to see. So why should we be concerned? You kids sit here and you eat salmon. You might go to Save-On. You might hear about farm salmon versus wild salmon. But what are some of the things that we have as concerns here in this part of the world? So this is a graph that I won't belabor too much. It's pretty complicated. But what it shows on this side over here, it kind of fades out a little bit, but on the right-hand side is how many people moved into this area between 2001 and 2006. So we've got places like Port Moody and Surrey and New Westminster and Vancouver, and there's been a lot of people moving in. And this has a very profound effect on salmon habitats. Salmon habitats can be affected by people moving into an area and building in and around salmon streams. And so people have started to get concerned, some of the fisheries managers and biologists, and what they have found is that you can look here and see that this particular pie chart quantifies from the time that people from outside of this part of the world, the non-Indigenous First Nations folks, started to settle the area, and development and human growth really started to take off. A lot of the streams were in fact lost. So 20% of all of these small streams in the lower Fraser River disappeared. And you can look outside and see a culvert or a storm drain sewer. Well, the reality is that used to be a salmon stream at one point in time. For those that are left, and here we have the endangered, 62% of all of the streams in our area are endangered. And this has a lot to do with all the people that are moving here. Now, your parents might have moved here. You might have moved here from another country. Or you might have, your grandparents or great-grandparents might have moved here a long, long time ago. Or for your First Nations, you might have been here for many thousands of years. But we all moved here at some point in time. And we have the potential, at least in modern day times, to really affect the habitat. And as one of the students said, the salmon come back to their same habitat generation after generation. And here's an example. This is Surrey. And again, the battery is fading, I guess. So we can see that there's a lot of houses, and there's lots of streets, and lots of buildings. And salmon need more than water to live in. They need the landscape around them, the intact trees and bushes and the grass to filter the water before it comes into the streams. And that will be affected when you have lots of development occurring. And salmon don't like that. So how do we sort of mitigate this or compensate for this? Well, there's a lot of production in the lower Fraser that comes from hatcheries. So you might go up to the Capilano hatchery over in North and West Vancouver, or you might go up the valley to the Chilliwack River hatchery or the Fraser Valley Trout hatchery. And this is to try and make up for some of the habitat that's been lost and some of the fish that are no longer here. So what about here in Richmond? Well, you have kind of a unique situation because you are sitting on one of the most important estuaries in the world. And the Richmond area and the Fraser River estuary is really a key habitat for not just fish, but all sorts of aquatic things, birds and invertebrates, and so like crabs and things like that, and mammals and beavers and so on and so forth. And so you can see the red circle, encirclement, that's pretty well the estuary, and Richmond is sitting right there smack dab in the middle. And so what are some of the attributes? Well, it's the largest wintering concentration of water birds and raptors. So raptors are the, like hawks and things like that, that fly around and grab things and eat them. Water birds, ducks and geese and things like that. So it's a very important habitat in that regard. It's recognized around the world, globally, that this is a really important spot. And it's really the Pacific estuary. This is one of the most important Pacific estuaries from Alaska down to California. And it is also a key salmon habitat. And in particular, there's two species, and we already talked about those. Chum fry and Chinook fry spend a lot of time in the estuary before they go out into the ocean. And Jim just talked about tagging fish and looking at the patterns at how they go in and out. Well, sockeye salmon go out right away. They don't use the estuary very much. Coho go out right away, don't use the estuary very much. And pink salmon go out right away, don't use the estuary very much. But Chinook and chum are really attuned to using the estuary. So this is an important habitat. And again, how does this work? Well, the estuary, for those of you that ever fly into the Vancouver National Airport, you'll come down really low and you'll see all these big muddy flats and these shallow channels and the river meandering all over the place. Well, that's the Fraser River estuary. And that's where these little chum and these little Chinook live, in addition to a myriad of other species, birds and so on and so forth. But when you take that away, when you change all of that messy looking stuff and start to straighten it and channelize it and block it off, well, it becomes a real problem. And in fact, here's an example of an area, a really rich fish area that 100 years ago was still around. It was the Sumas Lake area just by Abbotsford. And in the late 1920s, it was drained. And it makes this wonderful agricultural area. In the top right corner, you can see these great big wonderful fields of corn and grass and so on and so forth. But that habitat, that beautiful habitat, particularly for sturgeon, was lost, and it was lost forever. So what are some of the things that affect the estuary? And I won't really get into it too much because we don't have a lot of time. But dredging. Ships want to get up to as far up to Surrey and New Westminster. If you dredge the river and you take a nice, shallow, very complex kind of a habitat and turn it into a great big channel, fish don't like that very much. When you put a great big causeway out, like when you go on the ferry over to Victoria, or you can see the coal trains going to Roberts Bank, when you put a great big causeway out, the little fish that are swimming around in those little channels, all of a sudden they're blocked and they're pushed out to sea, and that's not very good as well. And then we have that messy stuff down at the bottom, large woody debris. And when you see wood and junk in the water, you think, gee, I think we should clean that out. It looks terrible, it looks messy. In fact, the wood in the water, in the estuary, is an important part of fish habitat. These are the little houses that fish like to live. They like to live in and amongst the branches and the old rotting logs that are actually really good for insects and other things. So we need to be careful about that. So what can you do, just in final summary? Well, as students, you want to learn about salmon and their habitats and needs, and here you are today. You're learning a little bit about them. Get involved with a group that tries to help salmon and their habitats. And that includes things like maybe the BC Wildlife Federation or the David Suzuki Foundation, or maybe there's stuff in your local community that's more attuned to kids. Salmonids in the classroom is a good example of that, so your teachers may be involved in that. Get your parents involved. Bug your parents, you know. You bug them for all sorts of things. My kid just bugged me for something called an Xbox, and that cost me a lot of money last weekend, but bug them to write some letters and say, you know, we need to help salmon, and that's important. And then be careful what you do in and around streams, because whenever you walk on a stream bank in some way, probably not too much, but when you build houses next to streams, when you develop, it has a potential of profoundly and negatively affecting habitat. So just be careful, and as you get older, you can become more involved in to try and protect these kinds of habitats. So just in closing, thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience, and hope you have a great day.